I think that a lot of readers and film fans have heard of the word Necronomicon. Even if you don't know a thing about H.P. Lovecraft, you might have heard of it from other horror media such as the Evil Dead films. I heard of it back when I didn't even know of Lovecraft. At first I thought it was a legitimate book and went looking for it in bookstores. Yeah, embarrassing. While the Necronomicon is technically just a book in the Mythos series, there's more to it that deserves to be known. So let's consider this video Necronomicon 101, or everything you should know about the Necronomicon. The Necronomicon was a creation of Abdul al-Hazred, known as the Mad Arab. No, not that kind of Mad Arab, but mad in that he was an occultist and a seeker of forbidden knowledge in the world. Al-Hazred came from Sana'a in Yemen and lived around the year 700 AD. Not one to be satisfied with the answers given by Islam, the religion of the region, he travelled extensively, including visiting the ruins of long-dead Babylon, the center of Mesopotamia. He visited the once great city of Memphis, capital of Anab-Hech, a region in ancient Egypt, and said to be under the protection of the god Ptah. He then spent numerous years alone wandering the great endless deserts of southern Arabia. Nobody knows what he encountered out there, for not many dared to wander that deep into so hostile and unknown a land. But whatever happened to him, it must have been horrific, for he managed to eventually leave that hellish place and settle down in Damascus, where he went about creating a volume of knowledge so hideous that it plagued those who dared to even page through it. He named it Al-Azif, a term used by Arabs to designate that nocturnal sound made by insects, supposed to be the howling of demons. Now we know it as the Necronomicon. Soon after writing it, Al-Hazred suffered a fate most unbearable. The most reliable answer to his destruction comes from the statement of Ibn Khaldun, an Islamic scholar at the time. He states that in 738 AD, Al-Hazred was seized by some force and pulled into the air and was mauled and mangled into nothing more than human viscera before a crowd of terrified onlookers. Some Arabs of his time said he deserved such a fate, for he was not a faithful Muslim, but rather a worshipper of beings most blasphemous, one of which was Yog-Sothoth, and made claims of secrets that usurped the idea that we were the children of Allah and that the world belonged to Allah alone. For centuries his work and life faded into nothingness until 950 AD, the Necronomicon, still going under the name Al-Azif, was found and translated into Greek from the original Arabic by certain philosophers, namely Theodorus Philetas, and given the name that we now know it by. The results of his efforts were no less pleasant than they were for Al-Hazred, and there were great efforts to burn and suppress copies whenever found, presumably this time by Christian forces who would likely object to any book claiming spiritual authority over the Bible. Again, for hundreds of years, nothing was heard. In 1228 AD, the book resurfaced and was translated, I assume from the Greek edition, into Latin by the scholar Olaus Wormius. I say I assume because sadly, or perhaps for the best of humanity, the original Arabic book made by Al-Hazred was lost forever around this time. This Latin text was reprinted twice to my knowledge, once in the 15th century in Germany and then again in the 17th century in Spain. It was around the end of the 17th century that the Greek copy was lost forever due to the efforts of prudent men to suppress and burn any copy of the Necronomicon. So now it seems that the Latin translations of Olaus Wormius are the closest and most accurate text we have of the original Al-Azif. Officially there are certain Latin copies held by various groups. The British Museum holds one copy, in Paris the National Library holds one, the Widener Library of Harvard University holds one, as well as the Library of the University of Buenos Aires, and of course witch-haunted and shadowed Arkham holds one copy. There was an attempt at an English translation by Dr. D, but it amounted to no more than a few fragments and pages, and was poorly translated with lots of errors in it, much to the chagrin of Wilbur Whatley in the Dunwich Horror. Enough of you probably already knew some of the things I just explained and know what the Necronomicon is. But how many people can say what's in the Necronomicon? As in, if I had it in front of me like a regular book and open it, what would I be reading? Sadly, I can't tell you that much. Lovecraft was never one for fine detail of his creations, so there are no extensive passages copied verbatim from his mythical book, but rather lots of inferences from characters who encountered the book in the stories. So here are the few pieces of information that I could find going through all the stories of H.P. Lovecraft. So-called elder gods and their doings are often referred to in the book. Yog-Sothoth and Cthulhu are the ones which seem to reoccur the most, but also lesser beings such as Tsathoggua. Spells and incantations for contacting these beings or to banish them or to draw their influence into our world are also included in the book. The nature and desires of these creatures are also sometimes mentioned. This plays a prominent plot point in the Dunwich Horror and the case of Charles Dexter Ward. The Elder Things are given prominent mention because of their importance on Earth. Spoiler alert, but they're the ones responsible for creating humanity and other beings such as Shoggoths, which are also mentioned. The biggest revelation is probably the existence of that which created all life and matter, the monstrous nuclear chaos beyond all angled space, which the book lists as Azathoth. Locations in the universe are also mentioned, places like Leng, the Lake of Hali, Bethmura, and many other vaguely described, such as the pits of primal life and the locations only described by their general properties but lacking proper names. More often than not, they're only listed as existing and nothing really more, leaving the mind open to wonder just what the hell these places are and where they are. Alhazred never traveled to these places, mind you, but discovered them, I assume, from dreams. The most disturbing thing is that the Necronomicon speaks of places beyond the universe, places not wholly of matter but yet can be accessed. It's one thing to know of hideous planets, but to realize that there are more beyond the limits of space and time and space flight and places we could actually count as physical locations is terrifying. Symbols and hieroglyphics are to be found in the book. Not really earthly hieroglyphics, but those of other worlds which hold magical properties. This is discussed briefly in The Whisperer in Darkness and in The Horror in the Museum. Sometimes these symbols, hieroglyphs, and incantations are not of any earthly language, making them extremely hard to understand and pronounce. And of course, the book is responsible for the infamous couplet, "That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons even death may die." So in short, you can say the Necronomicon categorizes all the things that if humans realized about the world would shatter our mental well-being. This concept brings to mind the opening of the Call of Cthulhu.
The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but someday the piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the light into the peace and safety of a new dark age.
Of course, the Necronomicon is one of Lovecraft's greatest inventions, and any Lovecraftian knows what it is. It is a brilliant concept which acts like a summary of what Lovecraftian horror is all about. This concept has been used by numerous other writers of his time. If you know your Lovecraft mythos, maybe you've heard of other mythical and blasphemous tomes of knowledge, such as the Pnakotic Manuscripts, also created by Lovecraft, Unaussprechlichen Kulten, created by Robert E. Howard, the Book of Eibon, created by Clark Ashton Smith, Kult de Ghoul, created by Robert Bloch, and finally De Vermis Mysteris, also created by Bloch. If I made a blasphemous book of soul-annihilating knowledge, it would be a pop-up picture book, just because I'm an arsehole like that. Lovecraft always allowed his friends to copy his ideas, and the Necronomicon was one of these ideas, explaining why so many of his friends and co-authors made up similar books, or simply made mention of the Necronomicon in their own works. Eventually the Necronomicon got mentioned so much in short stories at the time, either his stories or stories written by his friends, that it prompted him to sit down in 1927 and write out an official backstory to the book, which is where I got all my information that I used for this video earlier on. As for the part of my video where I discussed what's in the Necronomicon, all that information I got from skimming through various stories, only written by Lovecraft mind you, which took a long time, explaining why it took so long to make this video. The stories which proved the most helpful in finding information about the contents of the Necronomicon were the Call of Cthulhu, the Dunwich Horror, the Whisperer in Darkness, and At the Mountains of Madness. The Hound was the first story which ever really made mention of the Necronomicon, and from that point onwards, which was in 1922 I believe, the Necronomicon would show up in short stories either from Lovecraft or his friends now and then as a plot point. There is a book written before Lovecraft's time called The King in Yellow, written by Robert Chambers. It consists of numerous short stories, my favorite being The Yellow Sign. It is often assumed that Lovecraft got the idea of a forbidden book of knowledge from The King in Yellow, which also has such a book mentioned in it. But after reading the biography I Am Providence by S.T. Joshi, it seems that Lovecraft already had developed the idea of a forbidden book of knowledge before reading Chambers' book. Anyway, that's all I can say on this topic. I'm sorry it took so long to make another video, but I really enjoyed the effort in making this one. It really felt like being in university again and having to create an argumentative essay. I hope it was informative and you learned a little bit more about the mythos. And as always, thanks for watching.